Wait, you didn't create the plant. The plant was created by God and evolution or whatever you want to believe in and was in a repository of indigenous knowledge. Monsanto or whoever can patent a plant, a genome. That's kind of like...
Left a cup in here the other class.
All right.
Sorry.
Monsanto can patent a genome? Money trumps everything, even morality. So if you have money, you count. If you don't have money, you don't count or count less. So patriarchy. Heterosexual men are superior to all others. And so the matrix of domination or white supremacist capitalist patriarchy presents itself as the natural and normal order of things, but is really less than 1,000 years old. Of course, patriarchy is older than that, but the type of form that we're operating under here in the United States. Yes?
Kind of good news. Thomas Salk didn't do that, though, with the polio vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Women. Women constitute more than half of the world's population, but this stat was from 1980. Perform nearly 2/3 of its work hours, receive 1/10 of the world's income, and own less than 1/100th of the world's property. Okay? A UN report from 1980. Now you look at the stats for today, that hasn't changed much. Okay? It hasn't changed because there's a structure holding it in place. So if you think of power as the capacity to be effective, there's basically an invisible structure, but can be a perceivable structure that that when illuminated can help begin to dissolve some of this. But becoming aware of the structure does not dissolve it, but the structure remains in place because people haven't learned to perceive it. Learning to perceive it is just the first step. Now, if you were educated to believe in equality from birth, and if you constructed a society that did that, we wouldn't need to do all this. It wouldn't come up. No need to trip about a woman in combat.
Probably wouldn't be in combat.
Yeah, well, maybe, depending on the society, we would not have gone to war to begin with. But, all right, so you were taught not to see or perceive the matrix. This is a quote from Paulo Freire, who came up with that word Conscientização in his two books, Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Pedagogy of Hope. There is no such thing as a neutral education process. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of generations into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or it becomes a practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. So he's the one that coined that term, Conscientização. So Conscientização requires that you know what a healthy functioning condition is by either practicing it yourself or seeing enough of the condition to want to emulate it. So the practice of freedom comes from taking action against oppressive elements of reality and what some addiction treatment texts, for example, call problems related to the social environment. Could either mean one's social group or one's relationship to society. So for example, a white doctor in Portland who's using crack in Northwest Portland gets treated differently than a black person on crack. In Northwest, it's treated as a health condition. In Northeast, it's treated as a criminal matter, even though it's the same problem. And who chooses that? What structure puts that in place? It's the same system. So how does each one achieve recovery, as an example? So in the face of social inequities, counseling relationship or the activist should address these issues in the client and with the practitioner. So I'm just saying, this is not just philosophy. How do you do this? Part of therapy is the educational process. Education itself is a therapeutic process to correct conditions. A liberative discourse. So, for example, if we were conscientização, which is probably an improper use of the word, but I hope you get what I mean. The race card. So, race and other discriminators are not cards, but they're overt and covert rules which determine who is the dealer, who is in the game, and what hand gets dealt to who, and what cards they can play when. All right, so like in blackjack, an ace is either 11 or 1. Who determines that? You do. Right? To win. Right? Well, what if that's decided for you by the dealer? Right? You wouldn't like that. Okay? So, for example, when people say playing the race card. So when people of color talk about racism, in their hands, it's a 2 of diamonds or a joker. It's rarely an ace. Okay? And we're not bringing it up to say, oh, there's racism here. Well, that's like saying there's smog in Los Angeles. Okay? But smog in Los Angeles is based on certain economic decisions. All right? One of which is, I'm still trying to find this reference because I read it in the LA Times, so it must be true. But Ford Motor Company had a contract with the Army to produce a smog-free car that got 100 miles to the gallon. Smog-free, 100 miles to the gallon. Okay? Now, that was in 76. In response to that first energy crisis in the 70s, when the Saudis cut off some of our oil. Notice that. Notice that phraseology. So I'm quoting what was said. Wait, it's Saudi oil. Under their country, they cut off some of our oil. How's it our oil?
Never was.
Well, okay, but all right. If they'd had the technology to have a car that got 100 miles to the gallon and was smog-free, why hasn't that technology been released?
People make money.
Right, because of the economics. What happens when the price of gasoline at the pump, when you have a car that gets 100 miles to the gallon and you have a 12-gallon tank? Yeah, price would go down. Oh, we can't have that. So the status quo remains. It's a decision. So, and it's also a decision we're going to have smog too. Right? So if I raise that, oh, well, you're paranoid. That's a conspiracy theory. No, that's simple economics. Understand that. So in public discourse, it is only an ace in the hands of those who would discredit people of color or other people of color in the service of some system of supremacy. So George Zimmerman kills Trayvon. Oh, well, no, he's not racist because he mentors black kids. Okay, well, if you were a mentor, then you would understand that the kid is killed 30 feet away from his back door, and if you were actually the neighborhood watch person, you would actually know that he's the guest of those folks. You would know that if you're a mentor, if you're not racist. Right? There would also be no need to, oh, well, was Trayvon stoned? What's his school record? No, he's dead. What's the difference does that make? Why are you tripping on that? Neighborhood watch means that you're not necessarily armed. 2, you call the cops. Well, we won't get into that, right? So understanding some of how, for example, these dynamics work, and I'm just using race as one discriminator, and it's only one discriminator. So Al-Gebra means the mending. And to quote Lupe Fiasco, who is quoting the Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, that's what PBUH means. The ink of a scholar is worth far more than the blood of a martyr. So the scholar I'm quoting is Audre Lorde, black lesbian feminist writer. She writes, institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy which needs outsiders as surplus people. Okay, the concept of surplus people is in capitalism. Okay, because in capitalism you can't have universal employment. You need some unemployed for the system to work. Okay, because of how it's set up within the economics. It's again a supply and demand piece. Here's what work is, all right? So we set up this situation that happens with African democracy, and part of African democracy is the principle which is articulated as in Kawaida as Ujamaa, which is African socialism. It's translated into English as African socialism. Has nothing to do with Marx or any European socialist writer. Goes like this. You have the right, you don't own the land, but you have the right to farm as much land as you can to feed your family and to be economically viable in the market. But you don't own the land. But you can use it and bequeath it to your kids as long as you're using it, right? So everybody has work, and everybody has useful work. Not everybody is a farmer. Some people are storytellers, some people are musicians, some people are herbalists, etc., etc. So everybody has a place in the economy. There's no poor people. That's socialism, and that's one of the criticisms that capitalisms have of so-called socialist country. Everybody, is on the dole, or they are, getting money for doing nothing, or whatever.
Couldn't you say that that's where socialism came from then? That's not socialism?
Marx observed, or basically heard of a Frenchman who lived among Iroquois Six Nations, who observed that, you've got women running the country, there's no poor people, there's no homeless people, the land is owned in common, boom. He writes that up, and that becomes Marx's core idea for socialism. An already operating system, but he basically looking at it from a European lens. Well, how could we do this? Oh, the state has to do that. Okay, well, what's the state? We're all relatives. Is that the state? Comrade? No, that ain't working. Because you've been socialized differently. All right? So surplus people, who's surplus? You don't have that in indigenous societies. There is no person, because you're utilizing diversity, there is no person that is surplus. Everyone that's here is supposed to be here and has a use. Just like every plant. Not every plant is a weed. Even the weeds have a use. A weed is a plant that you don't know what the use is yet. I don't know what poison oak's for, but. So, surplus people. Come back. Come on. As members of such an economy, we all have been programmed to respond to the human difference between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways. Ignore it, and if that is not possible, copy it if we think it is dominant, or destroy it if we think it is subordinate. But when we have no pattern for relating, across our human differences as equals. So Audrey's basically writing about an American context. As a result, those differences have been misnamed and misused in the services of separation and confusion. In her book, Sister Outsider. So my quandary was, when I first designed the class, was looking at, okay, how do I can talk about ancient African history, but that's back then. How are you going to relate to that unless, how is this going to relate to now, in our conditions now? Well, you have to see what's happening now, where it came from, and a possible solution, part of which existed back then, but is going to have to be adapted to new conditions. Because we weren't socialized, we were socialized the way she's talking about, to see differences as a problem instead of a strength. I mean, our money may say e pluribus unum, from many one, but how do you do that? So for example, now crash. So the R squared in crash. So what this is a type 4 ism. So socio-structural violence. All right? So as an example, subordination hierarchy by spirituality. So basically starting at the top, who has the most power, defining power in terms of religion and spirituality, and who has the least. Now, tell me if I'm wrong. All right, so if we start with the defining the matrix of domination, dominant culture, the system, the man, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it. So, white, heterosexual, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. White Protestant, Catholic. Right? Because Catholics still have power. We've even had a Catholic president, even though somebody made an issue of it. Then brown, yellow, black Protestant Catholics. Brown being Latina. Yellow from China, or Asia in the East. Black Protestant Catholic, still worshiping white Jesus. Ashkenaz Judaism, Ashkenaz being European Jews. Then Beta Israel, and then non-European Jewry. Then Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. So others with scripture, physical buildings. All right? So all these folks is who I call the Abrahamic religions. That is in order of appearance, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Okay? The Abrahamic religions, because they all revere the patriarch Abraham.
Even Hinduism?
Well, I meant
Okay.
Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right?
Yeah.
Hinduism has temples. Buddhists have temples. They also have scripture. Right? So these have some degree of influence, even though we're not necessarily going to have a Buddhist president or a Jewish president. Because look how, basically most of the United States presidents have been Protestant, except for Kennedy and a couple others who were Catholics. If Romney wins, okay, we'll be the first Mormon president. Right? And what's the issue? Mainstream Christians don't consider Mormonism Christianity. Right? And they publicly say that, openly discriminate against that. Yeah? So white Wiccans, in terms of power hierarchy, they have power, more power than and influence than Native Americans. Definitely. Then, African spirituality. Hebrew Israelites, Church of God and Saints of Christ, African-based Christianity, the Aramaic, Amharic, Yeshua, Isho, an African image of Isho, Yeshua, and Rastafarianism and Vodou. Below Native Americans, in terms of power, access to power, and respect. Tell me if I'm wrong. using evidence from society. Now, in one sense, why should this matter? But I'm saying, look, if this hierarchy isn't true, tell me. I'm just looking at the evidence of society, and other classes that have seen this and go and actually just brainstorm this, and boom, 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 boom.
I mean, you see it, because
you see it. It's reinforced.
Recently in the Midwest, there were Sikhs that were killed.
Right.
And it's like, it's just seeing them as the other.
Right.
Not viewing diversity as our wealth.
Yeah, well, for example, okay, so if you think of Sikhs as a branch of Hinduism, right, that's specific, my thing is, but only because I've hung with them and, have a Sikh name, how do you not tell the difference between a Muslim and a Sikh? The differences are obvious. They really are. So you have to be, and I'm sorry if you don't know the difference, but it's stupid not to see the difference. Sikhs in their own country fought against Muslims when Muslims were basically converting people by the sword. They're not the same. There's a great bit on Kamal Bell's show, Totally Biased. Because he was playing off of Romney, saying when the sheiks were killed. No, they're not sheiks. They're Sikhs. This is a sheik. This is a sheik. This is a Sikh. This is a geek. Guy Facebook. This is Shaq. Shaq eats shakes. This is a Sith. Funny bit, it's on YouTube. You can Google it. All right, so in the 6 types of isms, type 1 and type 2. These first 2 are interpersonal between individuals and groups of individuals. Okay, the next 4 take place through collective action and institutions. So that system that I just showed you, that hierarchy, is part of type 6. It's invisible. Like we say, we respect all religions, and as a Lane Community College employee, a federal institution, I cannot give preference over one religion or another. And because I'm an addictions counselor, the federal government recognizes that support of spirituality and religion decreases substance abuse. Therefore, I let people not only have 12-step meetings in my conference room, but a few Muslim students have, done their daily prayers there. Guy came in today saying, I'm part of the LDS addiction recovery service. Oh, the Mormons have their own addiction recovery framework? Okay, cool. Never heard that. That's like Celebrate Recovery, which is, overt fundamentalist Christian recovery framework. All right. Bring your stuff. You want to have a meeting? Cool. Don't care about the black thing in your religion, but hey, that's just me. So type 1, verbal physical assault, fighting words. There's a Supreme Court ruling. So for example, type 1 is now included but not recognized by the case law in terms of electronic media. Electronic media have a physical, psychological effect, but the case law is not caught up as to how to deal with cyber harassment and cyber bullying. But people have killed themselves based on what has happened, right? So that's under type 1. Type 2. Chester Pierce and Daryl Wing Sue. So Chester Pierce was a black Navy, have I told you this already? Chester Pierce, black Navy psychiatrist. Commander, I believe, is his rank. So he's a psychiatrist with the Navy. He's studying the effect, what does Antarctica do to you as an environment? So he's studying the psychological effect of extreme environments. How do you go crazy, and how does Antarctica make you go crazy? You step outside, your pee freezes, so you don't go to pee. You don't take a leak outside. Your breath freezes. It's dark. It's 100 degrees below zero. These are things that you can't change, and they're harsh. So what happens, what drives people crazy, is the human interactions between each other where you start sniping at people, and it's not anything overtly, it's more like what we call passive aggressive. They start sniping at you, in a sense. So he called those microaggressions. And being a black Navy psychiatrist, he then basically takes that work, designs interventions for that, and says, okay, being black in America is like being in Antarctica. Okay? Nobody's calling you nigger every day. Okay? But they do things like somebody calls me up, makes an appointment. And they come in, looking for Mark Harris. Oh, you don't look the way you sound over the phone. Okay. So, you know, and I'm with two ethnic studies student class, two ethnic, you know, one's half Japanese and one's a white guy and they're friends, and they're just like, their jaws drop. Did she just say that to him? So I'm playing along. What did I look like? Oh, blonde hair and blue eye. The jaw dropped further. And she's like digging a hole. And I said, yeah, well, you know, I'm paid to sound white, but my voice is black at the roots. Then she got all red, and I said, so really you visualize me as like 6'8", blonde hair and blue eye because of, you know, my California accent. You know, I'm from California. I'm from LA, so I speak standard California newscaster English, which is no accent, right? Californians don't have an accent, like New York or wherever, right? Of course we got an accent. Don't be silly. But it's preferred. It's the preferred media accent, just like English is the language of air traffic control all over the planet. In case you didn't know that, but it is. Yeah, how does American Airlines land in Moscow? Well, they ain't speaking Russian. Right? So, Chet Pierce basically first wrote about microaggressions. So Daryl Wing Su, who was trained at the U of O and also works at Columbia now, basically expanded Chet's original work in '78 and came up with 9 species of microaggressions. So this is Su. Racial microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily, verbal, or behavioral and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to the target person or group. Now, this literature, the literature is focusing on race, but it's applicable to other discriminators as well. That's so gay. That's so redneck. It's race and class, right? Sexual orientation, race and, you know, whatever it is. That's so ghetto. All right. So they're not limited to human encounters alone, but may also be environmental in nature, as when a person of color is exposed to an office setting and unintentionally assails his or her racial identity. For example, one's racial identity can be minimized or made insignificant through the sheer exclusion of